Guys, welcome and who dat? I'm Joe, and today we are going to look at some possible first round scenarios for our beloved Bless You Boys in black and gold, the New Orleans Saints. I figured it would be a nice time to look at the first round, just focus on the first round. There's going to be some changes in the draft positioning of the players in the upcoming draft. We're going to have pro days. We're going to have the scouting combine, and a lot of the ratings of these players are going to fluctuate. But as the draft stands right now, I figured it's pretty close to what it's going to end up like. There's going to be changes, but I figure for right now, since we're in the dead zone off season mode, instead of doing another mock draft, I would just focus on the first round and some scenarios that could come up, maybe best case scenarios, worst case scenarios. And we'll look at the players at the top of the draft and we'll try to figure out what's going to be available for our Saints when their pick comes up at pick 9. Now, I guess Kellen Moore is going to be our head coach. At the recording of this video, we haven't picked any additional staff yet, so I'm not sure what defensive coordinator we're going to have. If we switch over to a 3-4 from a 4-3, that might change a lot of, the style of player we're going to be going after. And it'll influence how valuable the position is. So we have to keep that in mind. Kellen Moore may be able to get an offensive weapon that he would like to have for his scheme to work, or we get a 3-4 DC and then all of a sudden we're looking for a nose tackle or a different style of defensive end, linebackers, So not sure where the Saints are going to be focused at as far as position of need goes, but we know this team is lacking across the board. So we'll take a look at the first round and we'll see as of right now, which players will be there, and what are some of the best and worst case scenarios for our Saints. So we pick at 9. Pick 9. So ironically, in my opinion, there are 8 players in this draft, upcoming draft, that are not only, worthy of a top 10 pick, but they're probably just the 8 best players to take. They're the best at their position and they are, head and shoulders as far as consensus goes. They're pretty much solidified as the top 8 players in this draft. I'm gonna pull that list up right now. We're talking about quarterback Cam Ward out of Miami, defensive end Abdul Carter out of Penn State, the cornerback slash wide receiver Travis Hunter out of Colorado. You've got defensive tackle Mason Graham out of Michigan, wide receiver Tetaroa McMillan out of Arizona, quarterback Shadir Sanders out of Colorado, cornerback Will Johnson out of Michigan, and rounding my top 8 out, offensive tackle Will Campbell out of LSU. To me, these are the 8 that are kind of head and shoulders above the rest. I want to include 2 more, though, and just make this a top 10. I'm going to throw in running back Ashton Genty out of Boise State, and I'm going to throw in tight end Tyler Warren out of Penn State. Typically, running backs and tight ends aren't viewed as top 10 picks, but these are the best 2 in the draft, and it's not unheard of to think that somebody's going to pick both Genty and Warren in the top 15. I think that's going to happen. I don't think either one of them slips past pick 15. So they're worthy of being on this top 10 list. You could also throw in safety Malachi Starks out of Georgia. But once again, safety is a position that, much like running back and tight end, no one wants to draft very high. So if you're looking for safety, Malachi Starks would be the guy. And guard is another position. If you're looking for a guard and you're not thinking about switching Campbell, the highest rated guard in the draft is Tyler Booker. He has a first round grade, but a very late first round grade. But Tyler Booker looks to be a really good player that might succeed in the league. So I've got our top 10 here, adding Genty and Warren. And then I'm going to add a few more names here under this list. Safety, Malachi Starks. The best linebacker in the draft, Jalen Walker out of Georgia, who's probably an edge to some people, linebacker to some. The best wide receiver left on the board, either Emeka Igbuka or Luther Burden, who I have listed here. Of course, the guard, Tyler Booker. And then offensive line. I don't have an offensive line on this list. Matter of fact, these are the consensus best remaining players outside of the consensus top 10, but I don't have defensive tackles, cornerbacks, or defensive ends or offensive tackles on this list. Because when you focus on those positions, offensive tackle, defensive end, defensive tackle, cornerback, you're talking about prime pickings. So wide receiver too. And in my opinion, there's not really a clear cut number one guy left on the board at those positions. So what I'm also going to pull up is a long list of offensive tackles, defensive tackles, defensive ends, and cornerbacks. I'm going to put that over here. So this is the one of the worst case scenarios for the Saints. We pick at 9, and all 8 of the top 8 here are gone. I think that the top 8 on this list here is that's the best 8 players. I think if either one of those guys are available at pick 9, the Saints can grab them. It's worth the ninth overall pick, and you've had the draft has worked out pretty good for you. A best case scenario would be that there are several of these players in the top 8 sitting there, maybe 3 of them still there. Then you have an option. Maybe Dallas wants to move up from pick 12. They want to get Ashton Genty. So Dallas would trade. We would fall back from pick 9 to pick 12. We'd pick up an extra third round pick, maybe even a couple of fives, fifth round picks. And and then they get Genty, and there's still 3 of these top 8 left on the board, and we have our choice of one of those 3 at 12. That would be best case scenario for the Saints, I think. Uh, Not a lot of movement. The only way we're going to get a second round pick by trading down is if somebody's really desperate or if we're trading down, you know, past pick 15, somewhere around pick 20. If Denver wants to move up from 20 to 9, they'll probably have to throw in their second round pick. But yeah, if anybody close to us wants to move up, they're not going to give us more than a third. There's a way to finagle maybe a second round pick out of them if we throw in one of our threes or one of our fours. So we could pick up an extra 2 if we're willing to sacrifice one of our threes, one of our fours, something like that. We could make something like that work out. Maybe Dallas moves up from 12 to 9 and gives us their second round pick, and we give them our second, third round pick. Maybe Dallas would be willing to do something like that. So, and instead of picking up an extra pick, we'd just be moving up from the third round to the second round. That's the only way I can see the Saints getting a second round pick, by moving down, but not moving down too far. So that would be best case scenario. Saints pick comes up at number 9, and Three of these top eight are still sitting there, and Dallas is willing to move up three spots to get Genty, who would have to still be sitting there, and then we can move back, get a extra third round pick, and an extra five or maybe a couple of fives, because Dallas has four of them, and then Dallas gets Genty, and there's still three players left in that top eight. Maybe the two of them get picked, but then we're picking at 12 and we get our choice. So, that wouldn't be a bad scenario at all. That would probably be best case scenario for the Saints. Unless somebody's so desperate, somebody at 13 or 14 or 15 is willing to give us a second round pick and a fourth round pick, something like that, to move up. Now, if that happens, your top eight here is probably gone. But but you move down to 14 or 15, then all of a sudden safety Malachi Starks sounds like a pretty good pick. So let's look at the big list over here on this side because there's a lot of great players over here. This is one of the Saints' main needs is defensive end. So at pick 9, if your top 8 are gone and you're not interested in running back Ashton Genty or safety Malachi Starks, I think tight end Tyler Warren is a really good option. And, it would just be a top 10 tight end pick, but I think he's one of those guys that's definitely going to work out in the league. Jalen Walker, if we go to a 3-4, maybe we need a guy like that. Luther Burden at wide receiver to me is just, he's not big enough. He's only 5'11. We have a couple of small receivers. We need a big body receiver, so I'm not really interested in Luther Burden. And Tyler Booker at offensive guard, top 10 pick guard, doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. It makes sense to me because I think if we fix our offensive line, we're going to fix our team and our defensive line. But if we choose to fix the defensive line, this is why I have this list on this side because you can have, whoever our coordinator is can have a different, outlook of what kind of end they want. But I mean, you just look at the list of defensive ends over here, and it's ridiculous. You got Mikael Williams, who a lot of people mock to the Saints. He's not a good pass rusher, and he's kind of a medium-sized guy, but there's some upside there. If I was going to take a chance on a guy that needs to develop as a pass rusher, I'd want to make sure he's really good against the run. Williams is pretty good against the run, but I think Shemar Stewart would be a better option there. He's a bigger guy and he holds up against the run really well. And at the Senior Bowl, he seemed pretty dominant as a pass rusher. So if I was going to draft a guy at pick 9 at defensive end who needs to work on his pass rush, I would be leaning more towards Shemar Stewart or Nick Scorton, both of them out of Texas A&M, over Mikael Williams out of Georgia, just because they're a little bigger. If I'm going to work on pass rush, yeah, I want to make sure I'm stout against the run. But those three guys, Mikael Williams, Shemar Stewart, Nick Scorton, are your bigger ends who need to work on their pass rush. Then you got the other guys on this list, and you never know who's number one. Number one on everyone's list is Abdul Carter, but after that, you just don't know. Maybe people would be looking at Mike Green out of Marshall. Maybe it's James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. Or maybe it's Jack Sawyer out of Ohio State. I mean, who doesn't love Jack Sawyer? Those three guys are on the smaller end, and so depending on the defense you're running, you may want those guys, and you have no issues with rushing the passer with those guys. The issue you have is that they're light and they might not hold up very well against the run. Now, all three of those guys grade pretty good against the run in college, so that's why they're at the top of the list over here. But those are your other options. If you want three big guys that need to work on pass rush, like Cam Jordan needed to, but are going to be great every down defensive ends, then you've got Mikael Williams or Shemar Stewart or Nick Scorton to choose from. I mean, we need a defensive end. We're picking at 9. All 8 of these guys are gone. Who do you get? And if you do get Mike Green out of Marshall, is that a reach? If you do get Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M, is that a reach? So I wanted to show this because these are your options. Worst case scenario for the Saints, as far as the board, is your top eight over here drop. Your best available player left on your board is likely Ashton Genty or Malachi Starks or maybe Tyler Warren at tight end. So all your top eight over here get picked, and then the Saints at nine pick Malachi Starks safety. That might happen if they're going to pick best player available. Now, if they're going to focus on positional need, and defensive end is probably the number one need for this team, then you've got your choices here. Three smaller guys, three bigger guys. I want to look at defensive tackle next. If you're going to get the best defensive tackle left on the board after Mason Graham gets drafted, then you're probably looking at Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. He's not a pure nose tackle at all. He's a guy that can play both positions, though, and be versatile for you. So Nolan's a really good player. If we take him at pick nine, it won't meet that need of a nose tackle if we're switching to a 3-4, but it will fill the need of better defensive tackles, better middle of our defensive line if we stick to 4-3. I look at Nolan as more of a three tech on early downs, and so that means Bracy's on the sideline. I don't see Nolan and Bracy out there on early downs in the middle of a 4-3, but it's possible. Nolan is a pretty good defensive lineman against the run, so I just feel like he would definitely be in there on early downs. Your other option would be to go for Derek Harmon out of Oregon. That would be an option if you want an all-around defensive tackle, an upgrade against the run, but someone who also has some pass rush. Just not a really big guy that you would expect to play some kind of a nose tackle role. But Harmon is there as an option as well. Now, if you want the big body, you've got Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, and that's the defensive tackle I think we focus on, especially if we're switching to a 3-4. And another big defensive tackle that's got first round buzz is Tyleik Williams out of Ohio State. That's another guy that's a bigger guy. So that's your defensive tackle options, depending on what we run, 4-3 or 3-4. Is how we would view that. Though I think the only defensive tackle worthy of a top 10 pick at this point, you know, after Graham would be Walter Nolan, and yeah, that's pretty rich. All right, offensive tackle. Yeah, we don't need tackle, but Trevor Penning is not a future All-Pro Pro Bowler, nothing like that. So it's a primary position for a football team, and if one of these guys is in the Saints' top 10, then you'd have to look at it. The consensus number one tackle after Will Campbell would be Kelvin Banks out of Texas, and he may be in that short list over here. But I wanted to throw him over here with the rest of them because you never know how people feel about it. Banks, I think, is going to turn out to be a pretty good tackle in the league. So I like him. But I also think Josh Simmons out of Ohio State's going to be good. He was injured this year and didn't play the second half of the season. And a lot of people aren't sure how this is going to work out. It all depends on the medicals. If he clears the medicals, then he is certainly one of the best offensive tackles in the draft. So I have to throw Josh Simmons in there. And I'm also going to mention Armand Mimbo out of, or Mimbu out of Missouri. He's risen up the charts here, and he has got a first round grade now by most of the sites. So Membu is a guy that played right tackle, but he can also play guard. A lot of people project him to play guard, but he is good enough to play right tackle in the league. So Mimbu's an interesting guy. Some people that the people that draft him have options, okay? They might want to tackle and draft him. They might want to guard and draft him. So Mimbu is an interesting character. And the other one I have mentioned there is Donovan Jackson. I love Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State. He is a guard, and I would draft him and put him at left guard. But he had to play left tackle when Josh Simmons got hurt this past collegiate season at Ohio State. So Jackson was forced to play tackle. His first game was against Penn State, and it was a disaster, but he got better and better at tackle. And by the end of it, Ohio State wins in a convincing fashion throughout the playoffs, wins the national championship, and Jackson looks really good at left tackle when it's all said and done. So Jackson, not unlike Mimbu, is a guy that teams could project either way, tackle or guard. I love Donovan Jackson, and it would be a miracle if he's still there in the second round. But I wanted to list those offensive tackles because serious options here at pick 9 if you're going to stick and pick and your top 8 are gone. Now, best player available is probably Ashton Genty. So you just grab him and be done with it. Best player available after that's probably either Tyler Warren at tight end or Malachi Starks at safety. And you get one of those guys and you're good. But I have to mention this because these are positions of need and also valued positions in the draft. And the next list I got here is cornerback. Benjamin Morrison is probably on the top of everyone's board, but he's coming back from an injury. He didn't play this season, a lot of it, and he looked really good when he was playing in his college career, but coming off of a hip injury, it's one of those things. The medical's clear. Benjamin Morrison's your guy. I have a feeling he's going to slip into the second round because of that injury. I have a feeling if someone wants to go cornerback early in the first round in this draft, and after Hunter and after Will Johnson, then the number one guy might be Siobhan Ravel Jr. out of East Carolina University. He doesn't have uh, the tape against big schools because he's coming from a small school, and he also has the injury issue. He had an injury that caused him to miss the second half of the season this past year. So he and Morrison would be the top two cornerbacks on the board were it not for those injuries. Jahdae Barron out of Texas might be a guy that edges out both of those guys at cornerback because of those injuries. Jahdae Barron had a great season this year at Texas. He played on the outside. He'd shown he could play on the inside. He could play safety. And I think Jahdae Barron would make an excellent safety for the Saints. But as an outside corner, Barron is, pretty good at off coverage or zone, and not sure if he would hold up great in a press man situation all the time. I still think Barron would be a good pick in the first round and just put him at safety. Uh, your best safeties, of course, are Malachi Starks left on the board. Would be Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame. He's a ball hawk safety. That would be an interesting pick. And another guy is Nick Emanwari out of South Carolina. And he is definitely more of a downhill tackling kind of guy who's got enough athleticism that he might be able to stay on the field as a safety deep. But Emanwari is definitely more of a come up to the line of scrimmage guy. Watts is more of a float around and pick the ball off kind of guy. And Malachi Starks is kind of an all around guy who's pretty good at everything. You worry about tackling sometimes, but cornerbacks and safeties, if you can get them to tackle, that's pretty good stuff. So there you go. That is how I'm looking at this. Uh, you can fashion best case, worst case scenario by just looking at everything I have up here. I mean, if the top 8 are gone, you pick the best player on the board. It's probably one of these guys, unless you want to be position specific. or one of these guys is actually higher rated than one of these leftovers over here. Best case scenario for the Saints is two or three of those guys in the top eight are still there when you're picking. You pick the one you love and you're good to go. Or you're able to trade down, I think would be best case scenario, and still get one of these top eight players. That would be, of course, best case scenario. Worst case scenario would be if the Saints decide to trade up to get one of these eight players. I think that would be worst case scenario. That you would give up draft capital and maybe even future draft capital in next year's draft so you can move up and grab one of these guys, and it ends up being a move that, takes you longer to build your team. Maybe the guy you go for isn't any good. Worst case scenario for the Saints would be they trade up from pick 9 to pick 8 with Carolina, and they give away their first round pick next year, a second round pick this year, just to move up one spot. And then the guy the Saints draft ends up getting hurt in training camp and never sees the field. Then Carolina has your first round pick next year. The Saints suck all year long. We end up with the first overall pick, which Carolina uses. And oh, by the way, Arch Manning went undefeated with the Texas Longhorns. They win the national championship. Manning set some kind of crazy record with 30 rushing touchdowns and 30 passing touchdowns. And yeah, Carolina drafts him. That would be worst case scenario, but I don't think that would ever happen. But that would be the worst case scenario. But yeah, worst case scenario to me is the Saints package picks to move up and try to get one of these top eight, and then that guy ends up not that good. So there you go. You've got all this to look at. You can pause the video and try to work it out in your head. And this video is forever here. So whenever the Saints coaching staff is official, we can come back and look at some of the specifics of, positional need with the new coaches in mind. I'm Joe. Subscribe to Rosenfield 10. It's free. Like the video. Put a comment down low. It would help. I need all the new subscribers I can get, and we can keep talking as the Who family about our beloved Bless You Boys. And until the next one, I'll talk to you later. Let me know what you would do with all of this and all those scenarios. Let me know what your best case and worst case scenario would be. And until the next one, I'll talk to you later. Who dat?